Red Bull are champions, Lawson was lightning, and Sargent seemed shaky this weekend in Japan, so I asked you for your hottest takes from the 2023 Japanese Grand Prix, and it feels like there's a heatwave coming. Where else could we start but with Polish Eddie? Red Bull turned down their cars in Singapore in order to win the Constructors Championship in Japan. I think this does confirm that last weekend's Singapore Grand Prix was definitely just a blip on Red Bull season and not something that we can expect to come in the future. An incredibly decisive win from Max Verstappen. Interesting that Red Bull did go on to win the constructor standings, obviously at the home of Honda. They're still very linked to Honda right now. Honda moving over to Aston Martin in a couple of years' time though. But just talking about Max Verstappen in particular, he was the quickest out of the blocks in every single session. Just a dominant victory again from him that we've seen so many times this season. And they more than deserve the Constructors Championship win. Obviously, Max Verstappen still waiting on the Drivers' Championship win. But Max probably will go on to win that in Qatar. And he could actually win it in the sprint race. That would be really weird to see somebody win a championship on the Saturday. But I feel like this weekend, the performance was fitting to seal Red Bull's 6th Constructors title. Dominic says Checo should be dropped before the next race. I feel like we do have to say that Sergio Perez has played a part in Red Bull's Constructors' Championship victory-ish. I know that Max Verstappen is effectively winning it on his own, but Sergio Perez has also won a couple of races for Red Bull this season. I just feel like this weekend it was another qualifying underperformance, but that's not really a surprise anymore. We've come to expect that from Sergio Perez. It was a start line clash that, I don't know, it's one of those things that can happen at Suzuka, but I feel like when you're in a Red Bull, you just get through the first couple of turns cleanly. We see it Max Verstappen all the time. Just make sure he stays on track during the beginning of a race because he knows he can make up positions during the end. Then there was the pit entry penalty, which you shouldn't pick up when you've got as much experience as Sergio Perez in Formula One, although the biggest talking point was obviously punting Kevin Magnussen off of the road. When you're in the fastest car and they're in the slowest car on the entire Formula One grid, it's not a good look to smash into them and take yourself out of the race when you could have waited a couple of turns and got past fairly comfortably. I just feel like Sergio Perez has once again lost his confidence in this Red Bull car. We saw it earlier on in the season around Monaco and then the few races after that. I think we're going to have another 3 or 4 races where Sergio Perez really is struggling in that Red Bull car, and that makes a lot of people question his position in the team and whether or not he's good enough to actually play second fiddle to Max Verstappen if it does become more competitive with Ferrari, McLaren and Mercedes next year. Boneless Watermelon says, as much as seeing Checo retire twice was funny, I think the FIA should patch up some rules/loopholes about a car going back after a retirement. I completely agree with this. Sergio Perez's unretirement in the middle of the Japanese Grand Prix was just stupid to watch. Like the fact that Red Bull retire Sergio Perez's car after that collision with Kevin Magnussen, then they realize that he gets a penalty and that penalty could roll over to the next race, so they just put him back out on track. It just makes a mockery of the actual retirement that they did, because if the car was clearly in a fit state to run, it should still be in the Grand Prix. And also, if it's unfit to run, it seems like a safety problem, right? Putting a car that's deemed undrivable back out on track just seems stupid. Of course, I'm going to throw in a hot take of my own, and of course, it's going to be about McLaren. McLaren are the closest to breaking into the established Big Three and will finish ahead of Aston Martin. A double podium finish for McLaren, and consistent podium finishes are a real sign of progress for the McLaren team. The driver pairing right now is just firing. Oscar Piastri looks so quick, and the fact that he was able to do it on the most difficult track for drivers' skill on the Formula One calendar in the Japanese circuit is just incredible. And Lando Norris shows once again why he is one of the best talents on the Formula One grid right now and is always linked to those big seats whenever they do come up. I just feel like Aston Martin are suffering race after race right now, and they only really have one driver in Fernando Alonso, where McLaren have 2 drivers that are absolutely flying, a car that looks quicker and quicker every single weekend, and I feel like next season is their real chance to break into that big top 3. Buffy says, Mercedes, an internal civil war. Will we see a repeat of the Hamilton versus Rosberg clash with Russell? Coming 5th and 7th and only losing 4 points to Ferrari isn't a disaster weekend for the Mercedes lineup, but the wheel-to-wheel moments once again between George Russell and Lewis Hamilton really caught the eye, where they are just so close to contact, and we have actually seen them come to contact a couple of times already this season. It did feel like George was gambling a little bit to try and make up for the fact that he messed up in Singapore, and obviously when George had track position at the end, he really really didn't want to let Lewis Hamilton go, but I just feel like Lewis Hamilton still has that race pace advantage over George Russell right now. I think there is worry in the camp that they're not going to be able to catch up to Red Bull, McLaren, Ferrari come 2024. We're starting to see a little bit of frustration between the two drivers, and I feel like this is definitely going to come to a head. There's going to be a race where they take each other out, and it will be very interesting to see how that goes. Alice says Pierre Gasly was totally raging in his car at the end of the race, no words needed. This went a little bit under the radar and I didn't notice for a couple of minutes after the Grand Prix either, but there was a last lap team order to Pierre Gasly that left the Frenchman absolutely furious. Basically what happened was Ocon released Gasly so that Pierre could have a go at Fernando Alonso, who was ahead, but Pierre didn't manage to get past the Aston Martin, so the team decided that Ocon, who was on a one-stop strategy after a collision with Bottas at the start of the race and had actually driven really well, was allowed to take that place back from Pierre. But the team didn't handle this very well, and it clearly wasn't communicated very well, because Gasly slams on the brakes right at the end, literally the final corner, and then is absolutely furious over the radio with the team. I think this just shows that the Alpine team isn't as harmonious as they like to make it look, and there's some cracks starting to develop and an explosion ready to happen. Kaz says Lawson showed why he deserves a seat more than Yuki, even on pure pace, despite 2+ years less experience. This coming on the weekend where Red Bull confirmed that Yuki Tsunoda and Daniel Ricciardo would be the AlphaTauri driver pairing for 2024 is very interesting, because it's the first proper in-race comparison we got between Yuki Tsunoda and Liam Lawson. Obviously, Liam missed out on free practice in the Netherlands, and then Yuki Tsunoda had troubles during Monza and Singapore's Grand Prix. Lawson actually got ahead at the start of the Grand Prix with a really good move on Yuki Tsunoda. Tsunoda then did get the undercut on his teammate, but Lawson then got the undercut again on Yuki Tsunoda and got back ahead. So even though Yuki Tsunoda's pace in clean air was better than Liam Lawson's, Lawson still finished ahead, and the fact that he managed to finish in 11th place when Sargent had another tough weekend, I don't think the 2024 dream is over just yet for Liam Lawson. Dane says ban Sargent and Lance Stroll from the rest of the season and let someone that can do a better job in that Aston Martin and Williams car. Let's focus on Lance Stroll to start with, because it felt like it was actually going really well for Aston Martin at the start of the Grand Prix. Alonso and Stroll ran 6th and 12th respectively. Both drivers had made up quite a few positions, and it's not Stroll's fault that his rear wing then failed and he had to drop out of the Grand Prix, but he was unable to mount an attack on the AlphaTauris for around 20 laps when you assume that Aston Martin car is the quicker car compared to the AlphaTauri. And then it was just another weekend where Stroll's real purpose within the Aston Martin team is questioned, and if they lose 4th in the constructor standings, there's only really one driver to blame. Josh then said Williams should drop Sargent, he's holding them back, costing them a lot of money in damages. I'm sure Red Bull would want Lawson in Formula 1 after 4 great races. Lawson to Williams should happen for 24. There's quite a few people calling this the lowest point in the season for Logan Sargent, and considering there haven't been many high points, it really does just show how bad this weekend was. He wrecked the car before he even set a lap time in qualifying, which again just cost the team so much money to put the car back together again. They then had a 3rd car breach as they were putting the car back together, so he started with a 10-second penalty before the race had even got going. He then locks up, smacks into the side of Valtteri Bottas, gets himself another 5-second penalty on top of that, which he did serve properly, unlike Sergio Perez, but then he retires from the race anyway with damage later on. So it was just another race weekend where Logan Sargent really didn't convince anyone that he deserves to keep that seat. And with Lawson doing so well in the AlphaTauri, they should definitely at least have a conversation with Liam Lawson heading into 2024. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, I also made this video here about how Logan Sargent isn't the biggest problem for Williams moving forward. It's actually the cost cap. So click that link and I'll see you over there.